Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our third part series of with Tracey Reed, who's a certified holistic nutritionist consultant. She's back with us again, and she's going to talk about other lifestyle strategies to stabilize mast cells. So, Tracey, I just want to welcome you and thank you again for coming back. And we're looking forward to your presentation today.
Yes, thanks for having me back again. I'll just jump right in with slides. And I'm going to try to go a little bit quickly because I have a few more slides than usual. Okay, I'm just going to close all these windows so I can see the slides. So we'll start with the disclaimer, which I always kind of have to go through. I am not here for medical advice. Always talk with your primary caregiver, physician, before you make any changes. And I think what's really relevant in today's conversation is that I am a holistic nutritional consultant, not actually talking nutrition today, but it's that holistic part in my title that gives me sort of a broader scope. I look at other aspects of people's health, not just what they're eating. So just a reminder that today's content is for wellness advice only. Always discuss this again with your healthcare provider. So this is part 3 of a 3-part series. Last time we talked about diet. The time before that, we were sort of looking at the research, connecting mast cells and PF. And this is a graphic, just to summarize and kind of recap very quickly. This is a really lovely graphic that I found in a research article entitled Augmentation of Mast Cell Stability, a Therapeutic Strategy for Idiopathic Pulmonary Fibrosis. But you can see that scale there. And on the left-hand side of the scale, mast cells release chemical mediators. And so you can see all of the different chemical mediators that mast cells release that are pro-fibrotic. So these are chemicals that can contribute to the development of fibrosis. And mast cells do release a few things that are anti-fibrotic as well. But in contrast, we see that there are many, many more pro-fibrotic chemicals. So that's just a little recap. And then last time we talked about diet. And so we've sort of established that it is important. We need to stabilize mast cells. So this grandmotherly type woman here is looking quite stern to remind you of this. And we've already discussed the diet piece. So today we are going to look specifically at identifying some triggers, some things that may have initiated pulmonary fibrosis in your body. We're going to look at something called mast cell crosstalk, and it's really important to have a quick look at this, and then strategies to stop this crosstalk. So we're going to start by jumping in with the trigger part of today's talk. Now, triggers again are something that may have initiated or may have induced some injury to your lungs as sort of a starting point for what's happening with pulmonary fibrosis. And there are quite a few things that the research literature supports as inducing this injury. So there are a lot of different dusts. So in mining, for people who've worked in the mining industry, there's things like coal dust and metal dust. If you have worked in farming or maybe grew up on a farm, there are things like Roundup. That's an herbicide that gets sprayed. The active ingredient in that is glyphosate, and that seems to be very damaging for human health. Or grain dust. So again, these dusts that you tend to breathe in that can induce some lung injury. In the field of construction, we see things like asbestos, again, sort of toxic substances that can irritate and injure the lungs. And there can be exposure to toxins or pollutants. Now, I've bolded mold because this is not something that is very often talked about. And mold can be very invisible. It can be hidden. If you have had any kind of water damage in your home, if you've had a leak anywhere, you may have hidden mold. And if you're living in an older house where you don't know if there were leaks in the past, there may be hidden mold. Also, if you're living in a new house, so built sort of from, I would say, 2017 onwards, new homes are very, very well sealed. And that means that moisture doesn't have a place to escape to. And we often see that newer homes also have hidden mold. So where is this mold hiding? Well, it's often behind drywall or in between your floors of your house. And mold we have mold everywhere. It just naturally is occurring in our environment. It's in the air. But when a surface gets wet, say your drywall in your house, for instance, drywall is the perfect food for mold. So just the mold's already there. Again, it's everywhere. And then you add that water and it just creates the perfect environment for mold. So for those of you who are watching today and you're like, I've never been in mining or farming or construction. I just don't know. You're that idiopathic person. I don't know what triggered my pulmonary fibrosis. Mold, again, is one of these really invisible ones that we're just really starting to understand now in human health. And in fact, I just had some mold restoration in my house. I've had a little bit of mold probably for the last 2 months that I didn't see until a few weeks ago. And as a result, I have asthma right now. And it took me, I didn't discover the mold until recently. So I couldn't really figure out why I had this escalation of a symptom. Smoking is probably really well recognized. Radiation. So if you've had radiation for cancer treatments or other types of radiation in the lung area, and medication. So again, these are all pretty well recognized. Diseases, connective tissue autoimmune diseases, where connective tissue in various parts of the body can be impacted. So things like scleroderma, sarcosis, there's a bunch of them. And then infections as well. So things like Epstein-Barr. So that's the virus associated with mono. So if you ever had mono, also known as the kissing disease, herpes virus 8, Lyme disease, and Lyme disease is really spreading rapidly across North America. So a lot of people have had Lyme disease, didn't actually know that they had it. So that could be another reason for injury. So those are things that we know the research supports can induce that initial lung injury. Now I want to compare this to mast cell triggers because there are things that can cause your mast cells to be a little bit dysregulated or sensitized. Sometimes there are different foods, people who have food sensitivities. Stress is a really big one. Stress impacts really every aspect of our health. Exercise for some people. So some people will have sort of mast cell events with intense exercise. Temperature extremes or changes, physical stimuli, things like vibrations or friction. But I've circled the two that really overlap with lung injury. And these are toxins and infections. So the things that we just looked at in terms of lung injury, those were all various toxins as well as some infections. Hypoxia is on here too, which I'll touch on just briefly later on. But it's really these toxins and infections that I wanted to highlight.
Tracey? Sorry.
Yes.
You're talking about infection. Have you seen anything on, getting COVID infections, right?
Yes. So
will that trigger, your mast cells?
Yeah, I've seen several research papers showing that they trigger mast cells. So with COVID, there was so much conversation around the cytokine storm. And a cytokine storm is when immune cells release a whole bunch of cytokines. Cytokines are very inflammatory. They're one of these chemicals. And mast cells are very, very involved in these cytokine storms. So there have been a couple of papers published correlating for long haul COVID, people who developed long haul COVID, that there is mast cell activation in those people. And so the real question, and it seems to be kind of split. Some people may have had mast cell issues before that were pretty low grade, and then COVID just escalated that. Or for some people, it was actually the trigger that induced the injury, and then they had mast cell activation. And then interestingly, there's also research looking at utilizing quercetin, which we discussed in the last webinar, for long COVID. It's very, very effective. And quercetin is a mast cell stabilizing flavonoid that is found in food. So yeah, some pretty cool research. Yeah, so great question. So those triggers, if again, especially if you have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and you've been seeking answers, you've been wondering why this developed, you don't really understand what it was that maybe induced that initial injury or triggered the response in your body, there are some tests that you can do. So this is one of the things that when I'm working with people, I really try to look for clues as to, you know, is there a need to do some testing? And I don't do the testing, but then I make the appropriate referrals. So heavy metal toxicity is one example. Now, heavy metals include things like lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury. So I'll tell you some common situations where I see clients that have heavy metal toxicity. Again, if they've worked in industries that utilize those. So arsenic is in chicken feed. So if you're a farmer and you're, you know, handling chicken feed, you might have arsenic exposure. Mercury, if you have ever had those silver dental fillings, those are mercury fillings. Those can contribute to some toxicity in the body. Aluminum is another heavy metal that's really common. And it's in sunscreens, it's in deodorants, it's in a lot of things that you just might be using in your everyday products. Environmental toxins, this is a pretty broad term. And this is really anything in our environment. Could be things in the air, including air pollution. It could be body care products, you know, cleaning products you're using in your household. So there's lots of different things there. Mold, I've talked about, and there are ways to test both your home for mold as well as your body for mold. And then some other tests that can sometimes be interesting. There's a comprehensive stool test that can reveal actually quite a lot of information about what's going on in the body. And then chronic infections. Some people, again, have low grade chronic Lyme would be a really good example of something that can be lingering in the body. And that comprehensive stool test can also pick up GI infections that are really, really difficult to pick up with standardized testing that you would get, you know, through your provincial lab services. So things like parasites and other GI things. So these are tests, again, these cannot be done, unfortunately, by your family doctor or even specialists that you're seeing. Unfortunately, these are private lab tests that you would have to go see someone like a naturopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor for. But I wanted to at least let you know, again, if you're that person who has idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and you just don't understand and you're seeking those answers, I think this is really relevant information to know.
Tracey, can I ask you, someone wanted to know,
Yeah.
You talked about the environmental toxins, and you were talking about aluminum and everything. Do you also mean the aluminum pans that we use for cooking, or the aluminum tin foil that we use to cook as well?
Yeah, excellent question. So most aluminum pans, the aluminum is sealed, it's encased in like a stainless steel. But if it's not, I would be really, really concerned. I'd encourage you to swap out for a different pan. So stainless steel, just pure stainless steel is really safe. One of my favorite, though it's really heavy to use, is cast iron. So that's a really nice way to cook, or ceramic coated pans for people who are looking for a non-stick surface. So Teflon is another toxin. It's another place we can get some toxicity from. And then cooking with aluminum foil, I would discourage its use. When aluminum foil is heated, these little micro, I don't know what to call them, microfibers, little tiny bits of aluminum leach into the food with heat. So aluminum, is a big concern as well. And so instead of using aluminum foil, you can use parchment paper. And if you want to, okay, we just had Christmas. So if you were cooking a big turkey and you normally cover it in foil after a while, you take parchment paper, and a parchment paper doesn't have that flexibility or that bendability that aluminum foil has. But if you soak the parchment paper, just run it under cold water and then squeeze out the water, then it's much more malleable and you can kind of shape it to your turkey. So that would be an alternative.
So
okay.
There's one question that someone wanted to ask. I believe, and you might not know the answer to this, but yesterday there was discussion about the United States questioning the hazards of those appliances that use gas products. That it might cause some respiratory or some kind of ailment. I don't know if you know anything about that, that it might pertain to the cooking, or it might trigger your mast cells, or.
I have not seen information on that. But there are, within our households, there are many things that could be contributing. I think there's always ways to try to just mitigate these things as much as possible, right? So having your stovetop vent on, opening some windows. In fact, I would encourage, I know we live in Canada and it's always really cold, but one of the things I like to do on a warmer day is like open a front door and a back door, maybe for 10 minutes, and let the air just kind of flow through the house. And I say a door as opposed to a window because some of the airborne particles that we want to clear out of our house are heavier. So they sink down lower to the floor. And by opening a window, those may not necessarily kind of get aired out. So that's kind of a simple strategy. And yeah, the turning on the vent as well. And of course, there's air filtration systems you can put in your home or in individual rooms as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so next part of today's conversation is mast cell crosstalk. Now, on this image, you can see right here, we've got some neurons. Neurons are nerve cells. So your nerves that run through your body that control movement and all the functions in your body. And then we have mast cells. And basically, all I want you to understand from this image is that neurons and mast cells really like to hang out together. And so in the body, wherever we find nerves, we tend to find a lot of mast cells. And so in addition to hanging out together, they like to have a chat. So they're like best friends. They like to hang out together and chat. And so in the research literature, this is called crosstalk. And this graphic is taken from a research paper. And the green teardrop shape you see in the middle, that represents a neuron, so one of these nerve cells. And the purple balls that you see around that represent mast cells. And nerves give off signals, as do mast cells, right? We've talked about how mast cells release lots of different chemicals. And so that's how they're talking to one another, is with these chemicals. And so not, they're not speaking the same language we do, but if they were, the mast cells would basically be saying, ramp things up, more inflammation, more pain. So they're signaling that to the neurons, the nerve cells. And then in response, the nerve cells are saying, keep talking, tell me more. So they're kind of egging each other on, and they escalate one another. And so when they're communicating, these neurons and mast cells, what they're doing to one another is they're sensitizing one another. They make them more sensitive, more reactive. And neurons, this might be a little bit too geeky and sciencey, but they are basically communicating through things like neuropeptides, nerve growth factor. And then mast cells are using mediators, some of these things that we've talked about in the past, things like histamine, interleukins, growth factors, tumor necrosis factor, tumor growth factor, many of these being pro-fibrotic. So this communication happens all the time. It's normal, but in some situations we see, again, they start to egg each other on and they start to sensitize one another. And so there was this initial study done in 2017 that looked at crosstalk in pulmonary fibrosis. Now, the crosstalk here was not specific. This research paper was not looking specifically at mast cells, but mast cells are part of the immune system. So this was sort of an initial, you can see that this data is all really quite recent. So that was one paper. And then this is not PF related, but still lung related. So in asthma, the research has actually specifically been done on mast cell nerve crosstalk. And this research extends far beyond lung conditions, but I'm obviously highlighting the lung conditions today. And so we do have some research supporting that this does happen in the lungs. And then we have this other paper, this functional two-way crosstalk between the brain and the lung called the brain-lung axis. And this highlights a variety of pathways, this particular research paper, but I've highlighted in green the neuroanatomical pathway and the immune pathway. So those pathways are, again, this sort of mast cell nerve crosstalk that we're discussing. So again, just another lung paper. Again, I haven't been able to find research specifically looking at this in PF. So, but if we look at this sort of, again, globally, we focused in on the lungs now, but if we look at this kind of globally, again, I mentioned earlier that neurons and mast cells like to hang out together and they like to talk to one another. And places where we find that they're hanging out and talking are in our skin. So if you have any skin issues, this might be another sign that there's some mast cell neuronal crosstalk happening. Sinuses and lungs, and of course, we've just been discussing lungs, very pertinent for our conversation. This happens in the brain as well. So things like Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, all kinds of brain disorders. This also can happen in the sex organs and the bladder as well. It happens a lot in the GI tract, and then in the heart as well. Lots of mast cells in the heart. So then if we know mast cells are involved in PF and we know that mast cells and neurons like to talk to one another, what is it that's sort of starting this crosstalk? And this goes back to what we looked at in previous slides, this injury or trauma that initially happens in the lungs. So that, again, could be infection, that could be toxins or pollutants or other disease states. And ultimately, this is really a concept of safety. Anything that doesn't feel safe in the body can trigger the mast cell neuron crosstalk. And so again, whether it's a toxin or an infection or some other kind of injury, but even emotional states that make people feel unsafe. Mast cells and neurons have this response, this sensitization, this crosstalk, or this heightened crosstalk when something doesn't feel safe in the body. Okay, so now we know this crosstalk piece, and now we're going to get to sort of the practical part of today's talk. So in the last webinar, we gave you lots of practical tips from a dietary perspective, but diet alone is not enough. Again, I'm a holistic practitioner. I'm trying to look at the whole picture. And so we have to look at multiple modalities and what we can do to address what's happening in the body. So we want to break the cycle. We want to stop the crosstalk. And so again, mast cells are talking to neurons, neurons are talking back to mast cells. So we want to break this. We want to stop the neurons from being able to talk to the mast cells or inhibit it. We can't stop it completely, and that wouldn't actually be advisable. And then we want to also inhibit or stop it where the mast cells are communicating to the neurons. So the more places that we can come into these cycles that happen in the body, the more success we will have. And so when we look at the neuron crosstalk, the neurons talking to the mast cells, things that calm the nerves include things like yoga, meditation, mindfulness practices. So all of these things calm the nervous system, calm those neurons, and slow down their talking. And then the webinar we did last month, and you can find that on YouTube. So please go check that out if you have not already seen that. So the dietary approach that we talked about last time, it's going to inhibit the mast cells. So it's going to stop the mast cells from talking to the neurons. And so again, we want to do both of these things ultimately to have the greatest impact. There are many, many, many ways to calm the neurons. Time in nature is a really great one, and there's really, really fascinating research on time in nature. So this could be, in the mountains. This could be taking a country walk, but this can also be in your own, if you have a backyard, it can be in your own garden. If you have a city park near you, anywhere where there's, trees or water is really, really great. So don't feel that you have to make a trip to go into nature. Take advantage of whatever it is that's close to you. And again, I know we're in Canada, we have a really cold winter. This can sometimes be challenging to do, but even a really short, a 15-minute walk in nature has been found to be very, very restorative. Meditation is probably the most well-researched area in terms of calming neurons. And there are so many apps now for meditation. For those of you who utilize apps and have, an iPad or a phone or whatever device it is you use, one of my favorite ones, it's called Insight Timer. Now, Insight Timer, I really like because there's a lot of free content on it. So you don't have to commit to paying anything. You can try lots of different types of meditation out. If you are brand new, if you've never even contemplated the idea of meditation, there is another app called Oak, just like the oak tree, O-A-K, Oak. And it is a very, very introductory app for meditation. So that's a very nice starting one. Also, no cost associated. If you've ever meditated, again, Insight Timer is a great place to go. And then as you get more involved, you can subscribe to their services, but you don't have to. No affiliates. I'm not promoting them because I have any affiliation to those. gardening has also been shown to have some really calming effects. And, maybe this ties into that connection to nature. You're sort of got your hands in the dirt. But interestingly, some really good research there as well. Massage is another really calming strategy. And there are different types of massage. So you'd want to explore what feels the most calming for you. Group support can be calming for some people. One sort of caveat I have with group support is sometimes in group support situations, there are people who, are in there complaining a lot about their health, and that may not then necessarily be a calming situation for you. So you have to be a little bit careful going into a support group. Yoga, again, has been very, very widely researched to calm the nervous system. Epsom salt baths are just a nice, simple thing that anybody can do at home. So I encourage people to use just a plain Epsom salt rather than anything scented, just because we don't know what's in those scents, whether, there could be some chemical fragrances in there. So this is just sort of a warm to hot bath, typically as hot as you can tolerate. You put the salts in there and let them dissolve, and you soak in there for 20 to 30 minutes. And Epsom salts have two compounds, or one compound, two minerals in there. One is magnesium, and magnesium is very calming. It relaxes the muscles. And so it's for that magnesium that you're absorbing that's really helpful. And then mild exercise is calming to the nervous system. So again, something like yoga, Tai Chi, walking. So these are just some of the things that calm the nervous system. There are many, many. And it's very important that you choose something that really resonates with you and that you think you can do regularly, or a combination of things that you think you can do regularly. So maybe you take a walk in nature one day a week. Maybe you try to do an Epsom salt bath once a week, and maybe you attend an online yoga class, for example, once a week. So those, again, are just some examples. And so again, I did mention earlier, I am a holistic practitioner, which is why I talk about things outside of diet. Diet is obviously where I'm most knowledgeable. So when we're looking at a holistic approach for this whole mast cell neuron crosstalk situation, obviously the dietary piece is really important. The nutrition to stabilize the mast cells, calming of the nervous system is really important. And then reducing and addressing those triggers. So we touched on that with, some of these exposures to toxins that you may have had in the past. And one thing I guess I should point out with some of those exposures, those things can actually stay in the body. They can be found in tissue. So that's sort of another strategy. And that is why that final strategy is there, supporting gentle detoxification. Because if you have had past exposure to heavy metals or environmental toxins or mold, those things do need some support sometimes to be removed from the body in a very gentle way, always in a very gentle way. And I'm really excited actually to announce this. I did not have this in place when we talked about the food piece last month. But my colleague, Luca, who is my partner at Histamine Haven, where we talk about everything mast cell related, we have just launched our very, very first program. It's not our first program, it's our starter program. So if you watched last month's webinar and you're like, oh, you know what, I'm kind of excited about this nutrition piece, but I'm just not really sure how to do this myself. First Steps is the place to start, and it's really inexpensive. It's $27. So we've made it to put those dietary steps into practice. It's the hacks, those things you'll use all the time, those strategies and the how-tos. So if you're interested in taking those first steps, if that dietary piece is something you want to do, you're just not quite sure how to jump in and make that change, you can go to histaminhaven.com/FS. So FS is for first steps. And same information as in the past, you can find me at histaminhaven.com. We put out a lot. Oh, actually, we put out, I was about to say we put out a lot of great blog content, but this talk that we just went through, I am summarizing that and putting it into a blog article. So that's going to actually be available in February on our website. If you want to contact me directly, you can do that at mail@traceyreed.ca. And again, if you are interested in jumping into that nutrition part, just don't know how, First Steps is a great place to do that. And you can do that at histaminhaven.com/FS. And I did that much more quickly than I thought I was going to. I was really worried I was going to run overtime. So that gives us lots of time for questions today.
Thank you so much, Tracey. Someone said, they've seen all three, the first two parts, and they're thinking, it seems like almost everything will cause your mast cells to trigger. It's almost like a panic. and so, they're thinking like, what's the advice here? Like, everything you do can trigger something. So how best to kind of approach this?
So this looks a little bit different for each individual. The potential for, there's many things in our world today that really were not there just a few decades ago even. So there's more and more chemicals in the environment. We're surrounded by more and more electromagnetic fields with Wi-Fi's, and like there's just so much that a few decades ago we didn't have exposure to. And again, if your body is already sort of in this chronic illness state where your response is maybe a little bit more heightened, then you have to be a little bit more cautious maybe than a healthy person. It's really a process of self-discovery as to kind of understanding what your triggers are. From a food perspective, that's a really big part of what I do, because so many people that I work with have identified food triggers, right? They're like, I've figured out that high histamine foods are part of the problem, or oxalates, or, some other food compound. And so with the food part, like that's one thing I do is I guide people through this process of self-discovery. We can't avoid a lot of this stuff in today's world. So again, like taking these measures, right, especially these calming measures, it's so important. It's so easy to put aside, right? It's so easy to say, you know what, I'm going to commit to a meditation practice, but then you go, oh, you know what, I need to get to the grocery store today. I'm not going to do it. But it is very important to commit. And if, motivation is always such a hard thing, but to find, an online support, there's so many things online now, like COVID, that's the one good thing COVID has kind of offered us, is that you can find, yoga classes online and meditational sessions, support sessions online. So there are really good resources to help you stay motivated, accountable, to kind of put these practices into place. And it doesn't necessarily take a huge commitment, like start with 5 minutes of meditation a day. And, if it works for you, you can build it up a little bit. Start with like a few simple dietary strategies that feel like they're doable and easy for you to maintain. So it's starting with those little steps, I think is kind of the way to go. Yeah. I don't know if that addresses that, but
Last session when we were talking about diet, I mean, this came up as well. It's just that the cost of food has really risen. And here in Ontario, CTV had done a segment where a package of chicken breasts, because it was organic, was $27 a pound. And, people are wondering, like, how can they best manage their budget to, because they're reading labels now, they're looking at the calories, looking at all that stuff. But really, like, what are some helpful tips and reminders that when we go, and also could we go to the different ethnic grocery stores now, because they seem to have some great vegetables and things that maybe the rest of us don't understand or eat that
Mhm.
could be equally healthy, but maybe not so expensive. I mean, like lettuce is ridiculous now, and a lot of the stores and restaurants won't serve them anymore because it's so expensive.
Yeah,
How do what's your advice in
yeah. So some of the things we talked about last time that I think are important to remind people about. If you can purchase in bulk, that is often a great way to be able to bring costs down. So, I think of like farmers markets, when stuff is in season, often you can get case loads. Now you do have to have a deep freeze, obviously a freezer, to be able to then store some of that. But likewise, if you have farms in the area that do like direct to consumer, you can often again buy bigger pieces of meat. And for those people who are interested in doing that, but don't know how to find a farm, there's an organization called the Weston Price Foundation. And the Weston Price Foundation can connect you to a local farm. So they're really great if you're looking for that kind of relationship directly with a farmer. So yeah, purchasing in bulk when you can, buying frozen, right? You don't have to get the fresh green beans. You can get the frozen, often much more cost effective. A little bit of nutrient value gets lost with freezing, but again, living in Canada, where a lot of our stuff is coming up from the States or, maybe even Mexico, stuff loses nutritional value in that transport as well. So getting frozen produce, not only is it cost effective, but it's convenient, right? It's already chopped and washed. And then, yeah, I love visiting different ethnic stores. There's so many different greens there that you just don't find. And greens, we should all be getting, some dark leafy greens. So there's some great options there to try out in your stir fries. There's also really nice healthy, like really healthy carbohydrates that we don't find in our North American grocery stores. So cassava and jicama and what else? Taro, right? All of these sort of like carb-rich root vegetables that can be really
like
nice add-ons.
Yeah,
I have yet to try jackfruit.
okay. Because someone said that they noticed that in the Thai Vietnamese diet culture, they seem to do a lot of jackfruit, and they seem to be very. This person said their neighbor says it's very good for you, but they couldn't explain why it's good for you. So
I believe it has a really high fiber content, and I think it also has quite a high protein content. I could be wrong on that, but I also understand it to be very, very versatile, that there's a lot of different ways you can prepare it. I have not explored jackfruit, but plantains, another thing that we don't eat too much in North America. I know Superstore very, very often has plantains, as do many of the Asian grocers. Plantains are surprisingly versatile and surprisingly easy as well. You can just slice them up and fry them. They do have to be cooked, but you can fry them in, coconut oil or butter, ghee, whatever kind of healthier fat you like to cook in. So that's kind of another fun thing. But yeah, going back to cost effectiveness, the bulk purchases, Bulk Barn. I don't know if Bulk Barn's across Canada, but they sometimes have some options that are still reasonably healthy. And then sometimes, I don't know if all stores do this, but I know where I shop, they have this one little shelf section where when stuff is sort of on that cusp, it's either expiring that day, or the produce, is maybe like it's the bananas that are starting to go brown, or, some of the produce that maybe is a bit bruised, they will offer it at a discount there. So kind of keep your eye out for things like that as well. And then just do the best you can, right? You just do the best you can with the budget you've got, and don't stress out about it too much. Stress, again, is a big contributing factor to things. So just take a deep breath and let it go.
Because we have someone who said that, there's just the two of them. So it's hard to go buy in bulk because then they'll be eating it forever. And, try to do a variety so that you're not eating the same thing every single day.
Yeah. Something that you can buy in bulk is a whole chicken. It's much more cost effective to buy a whole chicken than it is to buy the breasts and the drumsticks and the chicken thighs. So that's one thing not a lot of people think about, right? And so if there's 2 people in a household, that chicken might be 3 meals. And so that's that, getting a whole chicken instead of the cut pieces is one way to reduce cost. Yeah.
Someone wanted to know, what about those protein shakes? You know how they call them Ensure and things like that, just because, if you can't get it in your diet, you drink these things, but they're wondering, like, there seem to be a lot of calories in them.
Yeah, so I am kind of mixed about those. So often those are designed to support some weight gain. So they're designed for people who cannot often orally consume. They're not able to chew or swallow very well, can't swallow whole foods. So the intent there is to provide the nutrients the body needs in a way that is easy to get in. So it does, from that perspective, it does have sort of a good nutrient profile, right? They're looking, when they create those, they're looking at, are there carbohydrates, protein, fats, and then all the vitamins and minerals. But they're not the same as food, right? You don't have the flavonoids, the polyphenols, the things that act as antioxidants in our body that, have all these health promoting properties. And then the quality of the ingredients used are also not necessarily optimal. And then if we look at that from a budget perspective, things like Ensure or Boost, those are really expensive. So it is not really a cost-effective way to get nutrients in either. So I would only do that if for some reason you're struggling to get nutrients in. There's lots of powders, right, that you can get in stores now that are, protein powders or green powders. Again, I would say if you're able to eat food and can get most of your nutrients from whole food, those are going to be better choices.
You talked about, things like meditation, gentle exercise, diet, being stressed. What about vitamin supplements? Many people are wondering, how can they utilize that to supplement maybe some of the things, some people don't like to eat certain food, but they still need the nutrition from that. But what do you think about supplements, vitamin supplements?
So I'm not a huge fan of a multivitamin because some of those nutrients will actually cancel each other out. They'll bind to one another in a multi. I, as a practitioner, do utilize a lot of supplements in my practice and do tend to kind of target them to what, the issues are in someone's body. But in Canada, you should be taking vitamin D. So if you're not taking vitamin D, I would encourage you. Vitamin D is So phenomenally important to human health. We need it for over 400 different functions in the body. And it is widely recognized that in Canada, our summer is not long enough. We do not get enough sun exposure. And that's normally how our bodies produce vitamin D, is through sun exposure. So that's one I think everybody should be taking. I don't like when people take the tablets, because vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. That means it needs fat to be absorbed and utilized. So I prefer it when it's already in a fat itself. So often there's drops, or sometimes there's gel caps that have the oil in there as well. So that's the preferred, my preferred way to take it. So that's something I think everybody should be on. Last time when we talked about diet, we talked about, vitamin C is a really important nutrient. But when there's mast cell involvement, the type of vitamin C you take, some people don't respond well to certain types of vitamin C. There's a brand that is, I think it's pretty widely accessible. Well, it would be accessible across Canada, but you would probably have to go to either the natural aisle in a superstore or to a health food store or supplement store. The brand is called Sisu, SISU. Again, I don't have any affiliation with them. But that vitamin C is quite nice. I like that one. Now with supplements, you pay what you get for. So I'm going to name names just so you know, but like, don't go buy Jameson, don't go buy Safeway brand. If it's in a drugstore, typically don't buy it, like get it. Again, the natural aisle in superstore is really good, or health food store or supplement store. The research shows that those cheaper brands, often you can't even absorb them. So, you think you're saving money by buying this cheaper brand, but when you consider that, like, you're only absorbing about 5% of it, it's actually a waste of money because you're not absorbing it. So I say to people, if you want to supplement, but you're on a budget, then like just take it every other day, take it every third day, whatever fits into your budgetary regime. Yeah.
One last question. Someone wanted to know, they see it in the supermarkets now, even at Costco. They're selling kelp and seaweed. And so, A, how would you eat it? And B, would that be supportive of your mast cells?
Yeah, so kelps, seaweeds, all of them are actually really nutrient dense. They have a really good mineral profile, but they are high histamine. And we talked about high histamine food last time. So it may not be a great choice. It may, it's hard to know from one person to the next. But ways to eat it. One of my favorite and probably easiest ways to eat it is to crumple it into a soup. And some of them are really soft. They'll just immediately soften into a soup. Other ones you have to cook a little bit, but that's a really nice way to get them in. I've seen flakes that you can just sprinkle onto salads and different things as well. But soups or stews are probably my favorite and easiest way to eat those. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say, we only have 5 more minutes. So if there's anybody else have any other questions.
Sharon, you wanted me to remind you of a question about body care.
Yeah, please. Personal hygiene, sorry.
So I think the question was around body care products. We talked about toxicity earlier on, and whether body care products can contribute to your toxicity. And yes, in a very, very big way. So there's so many body care products we use, from, think of in the shower, the soaps, body gels, shampoo, conditioner, all the things you use in the shower. And then what goes on your body when you step out of that shower. Are you using any lotions, deodorant? deodorant with antiperspirant. So the antiperspirant is what stops you from sweating. And usually that's aluminum based. That is quite toxic. And then, are you putting any scents, colognes, aftershave? Like, what are you putting on? Women tend to use a lot more of these products, especially because women, but men are starting to wear makeup as well. Makeup contains a lot of toxins, lipstick in particular. I think it used to be really, really high, about 90%. Now it's down, I think, to about 50 or 60% of lipsticks contain lead. And lead is one of those heavy metals. It's very toxic. I'm sure you've all heard the term lead poisoning. So if you wear lipstick, that's something to be really cognizant of. But again, anything you put on your body, some of it gets absorbed into your system. And so this is one place, again, if we're kind of looking at toxicity in the body, this is an area to be quite cautious with. Now, there are really simple options. If you need a moisturizer, use olive oil or coconut oil that you have in your kitchen cupboard. I kid you not. I just always have a bottle of oil in my bathroom, and I change it up. It's, always something different, but that's pretty much, what I use on my skin. So you can do some pretty simple things. I use, in my hair, I'll tell you, because it's all food-based. I use a combination of coconut oil and cocoa butter, which is like the from cocoa beans, the chocolate beans. That's what I put in my hair instead of like a hair wax.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because someone said that in their tradition they do coconut oil for almost everything. And someone else said they dab olive oil on all their finger joints and knee joints and things.
Yeah. And so the issue with all of these products, again, obviously I was mentioning stuff gets absorbed, but there are so many preservatives. Like look at the ingredient lists on what you're using. There's these parabens, phthalates, like anything that's listed as fragrance is some sort of chemical. And for some people, it's not an issue, but for most people, those are hormone disrupting. So yeah, there's just so much stuff in these products that can be harmful to our bodies. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tracey. I really appreciate this time. And I know our audience as well. You've been so helpful. And I highly encourage everyone to come and see all 3 series, as I think, they're good starters to help us to go along our way about thinking how we can take care of ourselves, how can we maintain our own health, body, health, and also try to do it on a budget as well, right? Like, we always conscious about that. So anyway, so thank you very much, Tracey, for joining us. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today as well. And this webinar will be available by next Friday. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.